In the shadowed heart of the ancient throne, where stone veins pulsed with forgotten blood, eternity whispered a plea for a queen who could bridge the living and the damned. The wind howled through the cracked spires of Castle Dravener, carrying the metallic tang of impending rain and the distant clamor of war drums from the borderlands. Ilara Voss stood at the edge of the crumbling balcony, her fingers gripping the cold iron railing until her knuckles whitened. At 28, she was a ghost in her own life, orphaned by the plagues that had ravaged the mortal kingdoms 5 years prior, her body now a fragile vessel marked by the fever's lingering curse. Tuberculosis, the healers called it, a slow unraveling of lungs that wheezed with every breath, leaving her skin pale as moonlight and her eyes hollowed by nights of coughing blood into silk handkerchiefs. She had fled the courts of men, those gilded cages of betrayal and hollow alliances, seeking solace in the wild fringes where human realms bled into the shadowed territories of legend. But legends had teeth, and Ilara, with her faint Dhampir heritage, a whisper of vampire blood from a grandmother long dust, knew that better than most. It was that tainted lineage that had saved her from death's door once, granting her unnatural resilience amid the sickness. Yet it isolated her further, a pariah among mortals who feared her unyielding gaze in the dark. Below, the ravine twisted like a serpent's spine, its depths shrouded in mist that clung to the rocks like spectral fingers. The kingdoms were fracturing. The mortal lords of Eldoria clashed with the eternal clans of the Night Vale, vampires who ruled from hidden citadels, their immortality a weapon in the endless political wars. Alliances shattered like glass under boot heels, spies slithered through moonlit forests, and battles erupted in crimson fields where the dying screamed for mercy that never came. Ilara had come here not as a warrior, but as a reluctant envoy, dispatched by a desperate Eldorian council that saw in her mixed blood a bridge to peace. Marry the king, they had urged, their voices oily with ambition. Secure the throne, end the bloodshed. But Ilara knew the cost. The vampire king's court was no fairy tale, but a labyrinth of guilt and shadows, where love was a chain forged in eternity. She turned as the heavy oak doors creaked open behind her, the sound echoing like a heartbeat in the silence. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, approached, soft leather on stone, accompanied by the faint rustle of velvet. Lucian Blackthorn, king of the Night Vale, emerged from the gloom, his presence as commanding as the throne he both wore and despised. Over 5 centuries old, he was a figure carved from midnight, tall, with raven hair falling in waves to shoulders broad from battles long faded, his eyes a storm gray that pierced like silver blades. Born human in the turbulent eras of medieval schisms, he had been turned during a siege, a knight's oath twisted into undead loyalty. Guilt was his eternal companion, the weight of siring clans that waged wars in his name, the memory of a lover lost to the sun's unforgiving light, her death a scar across his soul that no time could heal. Ethical to a fault, Lucian ruled not with iron fists, but with weary diplomacy, his solitude a self-imposed exile amid courtiers who craved power. He sought redemption in restraint, in the fragile hope that peace with mortals might atone for centuries of spilled blood. Yet desire stirred in him now, unbidden, as he regarded Ilara, not for her throne-worthy blood, but for the flicker of life in her defiant eyes, a light he had forsaken long ago. "You stand as if courting the abyss," he said, his voice a low timbre that resonated through the wind, carrying the subtle lilt of ancient tongues. He stopped a respectful distance away, his black cloak billowing like wings, embroidered with silver threads that caught the faint glow of lanterns from the hall below. Ilara did not turn fully, her breath ragged against the chill. "The abyss courts us all, Your Majesty. Mortals, immortals. It matters not. War devours both." She coughed then, a wet rasp that she muffled with her hand, tasting copper on her tongue. The illness clawed deeper each day, a reminder of her fragility, her humanity's cruel gift. Rational thought screamed at her to refuse this madness, to rationalize the pull she felt toward him as mere survival instinct, a Dhampir's echo responding to its source. But inevitability lingered in the air, thick as the mist. Lucien stepped closer, the scent of aged leather and faint incense, sandalwood from forgotten rituals, wafting toward her. "And yet you came. Why?" His question was not accusation, but genuine curiosity, laced with the loneliness of one who had watched empires rise and fall, lovers wither to dust. She met his gaze at last, her dark hair whipping across her face like threads of night. In his eyes, she saw not the monster of tales, but a man burdened by choices, his immortality a curse that amplified every regret. "Because the kingdoms bleed, and I am tired of watching from the shadows. My blood. It ties me to both worlds. Perhaps it can mend what swords cannot." But even as she spoke, doubt gnawed at her. Love. No, she resisted the word, the dangerous bloom it promised amid thorns of eternity. Death hovered nearby, invisible but palpable, its chill breath on her neck. He nodded slowly, extending a hand gloved in fine black silk, not to touch, but to offer. "The throne demands a queen, Ilara, not for conquest, but for balance. I have ruled alone too long, my guilt a heavier crown than gold. If you accept, it changes everything, the wars, the fates intertwined." The rain began then, soft at first, pattering against the stone like tears from the heavens, soaking her gown until it clung to her skin, cold and insistent. She stared at his hand, the recurrent symbol of their fragile pact. A silver ring on his finger, etched with a thorny rose, its petals wilted yet enduring, much like the love they might forge. Philosophical whispers echoed in her mind. Could redemption bloom from such cursed soil? Was eternity worth the suffering it exacted? As thunder rolled in the distance, heralding storms both literal and metaphorical, Ilara hesitated, her heart pounding a mortal rhythm against the immortal silence. To step forward was to choose transformation, to let love's shadow eclipse her light. But in that moment, as lightning fractured the sky, she realized the true dilemma. Refusing might doom the realms to endless night, yet accepting could unravel her very soul. And in the heartbeat before her decision, the wind carried a faint, eerie howl from the ravine below. A warning, or perhaps an invitation to the darkness that awaited. The rain fell in earnest now, a silver veil that blurred the line between castle and sky, turning the balcony into a stage of glistening stone and shadowed confessions. Ilara's fingers trembled as she considered Lucian's outstretched hand, the silver ring upon it catching a fleeting gleam from the storm's erratic lightning. The thorny rose etched into its band seemed to pulse with a life of its own, thorns sharp as memory, petals faded yet defiant, a symbol of promises forged in blood and forgotten in time. She had seen such rings in the dusty tomes of her grandmother's hidden library, artifacts of Dhampir unions that bound mortal frailty to eternal hunger. To accept it would be to wear the weight of centuries, her illness a mocking counterpoint to the immortality it offered. With a resolve born of desperation, she placed her hand in his, the warmth of her palm against his cool silk glove, a jolt that sent ripples through her veins. His touch was gentle, almost reverent, as if he feared shattering the fragile bridge between them. "Come," he murmured, guiding her back through the oak doors into the great hall, where candelabros flickered like hesitant stars against walls draped in black velvet. The air inside was thick with the scent of beeswax and old stone, undercut by the faint metallic tang of rain seeping through ancient cracks. Servants, pale figures with eyes like polished obsidian, glided away into the shadows, their footsteps whispering across the worn marble floors. Lucian led her to a hearth where flames danced low, casting elongated shadows that twisted like specters across tapestries depicting long-lost battles, knights clashing with fangs-bared immortals under blood-red moons. He released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to sever the connection, and gestured to a high-backed chair upholstered in deep crimson damask. Ilara sank into it, her gown heavy with moisture, the fabric clinging to her like a second skin, cold against the feverish heat building in her chest. She coughed again, the sound raw and echoing, a mortal punctuation in the hall's eternal hush. Blood flecked her lips, and she wiped it away with the edge of her sleeve, tasting the salt of her own unraveling. "You are unwell," Lucian observed, his voice a velvet rumble that cut through the crackle of the fire. He knelt before her, not in subservience, but with the quiet authority of one who had tended wounds on fields soaked in the blood of friends and foes alike. From a hidden fold in his cloak, he produced a vial of dark liquid, amber-hued, shimmering like captured twilight. "This is not a cure, Ilara, but a balm from the old rites. It eases the fire in your lungs, buys time against the shadow that pursues you." She eyed the vial warily, her Dhampir instincts warring with human caution. The liquid swirled with an otherworldly luminescence, promising relief from the disease that had orphaned her world, yet whispering of dependencies that could bind her deeper to his realm. "Time," she echoed, her voice hoarse. "What is time to you, if not an endless torment? You speak of balance, of mending kingdoms, but I see the guilt in your eyes, the wars you've waged, the lives you've taken in the name of survival." Her words were a challenge, born of her own disillusionment. Abandoned by a family that feared her tainted blood, despoiled by courts that used her as a pawn in their political games. She had desired only peace, a quiet death on her terms, but fate had dragged her here, to this precipice. Lucian's gaze dropped to the flames, the firelight etching lines of sorrow across his angular face. He was no tyrant, reveling in power. 500 years had etched ethics into his core, a knight's code warped by undeath. Turned in the chaos of a border siege, he had watched his human lover burn in the dawn to spare him the pain of her slow decline, her final words a curse and a blessing. "Live for us both, but never forget the cost." That guilt had shaped him, driving him to restrain his clans from wanton conquest, to seek alliances amid the brewing wars. The mortal kingdoms of Eldoria pressed against the Night Vale's borders, their iron legions fueled by fear and fanaticism, while traitors within his own court whispered of purges to purify the bloodlines. He desired redemption, not through conquest, but through a union that could silence the drums of war. Yet, in Ilara, he glimpsed something more treacherous, a spark of genuine connection, resisted even as it ignited. "I remember every cost," he admitted, his fingers tightening around the vial. "Every soul I sired in desperation, every betrayal that fractured my realm. Immortality is not a gift, but a mirror reflecting our failures eternally. The throne demands a queen not for my sake, but for the realm's teetering on oblivion. Your Dhampir blood. It could temper the rage, forge peace where swords fail." He extended the vial once more, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that stripped away pretenses. In that gray storm, she saw his solitude, the ethical king who chose restraint over dominion, marked by the lover's death that haunted his nights. Ilara took the vial, her hand brushing his, and uncorked it. The liquid was cool on her tongue, tasting of iron and wild herbs, spreading a numbing warmth through her chest that stilled the cough's rasp. For the first time in months, her breath came even, unlabored, a fragile reprieve. But as clarity sharpened her senses, so did the pull between them, the inevitable draw of her heritage to his eternity, rationalized as duty, yet blooming with unspoken longing. Love, she told herself, was a fool's delusion, a curse disguised as salvation. Yet the air between them hummed with possibility, textured by the fire's glow and the distant rumble of thunder. They spoke then, words weaving through the night like threads of a tapestry, of her grandmother's forbidden love with a night vale outcast, the plagues that had claimed her parents and left her adrift, her desire for a legacy beyond sickness and shadows. Lucian shared fragments of his past, the schisms of medieval courts, the political intrigues that had turned allies to enemies, his guilt over clans that betrayed his vision of peace. The conversation flowed, intimate and unhurried, punctuated by the patter of rain against leaded windows and the soft pop of embers. As the storm peaked, a messenger burst into the hall, his cloak sodden, face etched with urgency. "My lord," he gasped, kneeling, "word from the borders. Eldorian spies have breached the eastern veil. They seek the Dhampir envoy, to end the alliance before it begins." Lucian's expression hardened, the king emerging from the man. He rose, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword at his side, though his eyes flicked to Alara with protective fire. She stood, the vial's balm lending her strength, but dread coiled in her gut. Death, that invisible specter, had materialized in the form of betrayal, its chill now a blade at the realm's throat. In that charged silence, as Lucian commanded defenses and the hall stirred with shadowed activity, Alara touched the silver ring he had slipped onto her finger during their talk. A tentative betrothal, thorny rose against her skin. The choice loomed larger. Accept this path and transform into the queen who could redeem or doom them all. But as shouts echoed from the corridors, heralding the clash of loyalties, she wondered if love's redemption could survive the wars it sought to end, or if eternity would claim her before dawn broke. The hall erupted into a frenzy of shadowed motion, torches sputtering to life along the walls like frantic heartbeats, their flames casting jagged silhouettes that clawed at the tapestries. Ilara's pulse thrummed in her ears, a mortal drum against the immortal hush that Lucian commanded with a single raised hand. His voice sliced through the chaos, low and unyielding as forged steel. "Seal the eastern gates. Summon the wardens. No one enters without my blood's oath." The messenger bowed low, vanishing into the gloom as courtiers materialized from alcoves, their pale faces etched with the wariness of those who had tasted betrayal before. The air thickened with the scent of damp stone and oiled metal, the rain's relentless tattoo on the windows, now a mocking counterpoint to the urgency uncoiling within. Ilara rose from the chair, the silver ring heavy on her finger, its thorny rose pressing into her skin like a vow etched in discomfort. The balm's warmth lingered in her chest, easing the wheeze that had haunted her for years, but it could not quiet the storm of doubt raging inside. She had accepted the ring in a moment of fragile hope, a tentative step toward queenship, yet now the realm's fragility mirrored her own, teetering on the edge of collapse. Her Dhampir blood, that cursed inheritance from a grandmother who had loved a vampire in secret, hummed in response to the peril, sharpening her senses until she could hear the distant clash of steel from the borders, feel the chill of death's approach like frost on her breath. Abandoned by mortal kin who saw her resilience as witchcraft, despoiled by Eldorian lords who bartered her like a treaty clause, she had longed for purpose beyond her unraveling body. But this? Binding herself to Lucian's eternity amid whispers of treason, it was a choice that could redeem the fractured kingdoms or drag them into deeper night. Lucian turned to her, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that stripped away the hall's clamor. "Stay here," he urged, his gloved hand brushing her arm, the touch cool yet electric, stirring the inevitable pull she fought to rationalize as alliance-born duty. "The spies will not reach the heart of Dravenor. I will end this breach before it festers." But in his gaze, she saw the weight of his guilt deepen. The king who had sired warriors in centuries past, only to watch them fracture his vision of peace. Turned amid the screams of a besieged village, he had risen from the blood-soaked earth vowing restraint, his human lover's final pyre, a beacon that scorched his soul. Now, with wars reignited by mortal fanatics and internal traitors plotting purges, he sought in Alara not just a queen, but a mirror to his fractured ethics. Could love bridge what immortality had sundered? She shook her head, stepping forward despite the tremor in her limbs. No. If I am to wear this ring, to claim the throne as your equal, I face the shadows with you. My blood knows their scent. Eldorian spies reek of iron and false piety. Her voice, steadied by the vial's gift, carried a defiance born of disillusionment. The plagues had stolen her family, leaving her to wander ruined estates where fever dreams blurred life and legend. She desired redemption too, not for kingdoms, but for the girl who had survived only to question if survival was mercy or torment. Death lingered at her elbow, invisible yet insistent, its presence a philosophical specter. Was it the end of suffering, or the thief of unclaimed potential? Reluctance flickered across Lucian's features, but he nodded, gesturing to a concealed door behind the hearth. Then follow closely. The underpass leads to the Vale's edge, faster than the open paths. They moved as one, slipping into a narrow corridor lit by phosphorescent fungi that glowed like veins of moonlight on damp walls. The air grew colder. Textured with the earthy musk of roots and ancient earth, the distant rumble of thunder muffled to a growl. Alara's gown trailed behind her, sodden fabric whispering against stone, each step a reminder of her fragility amid his eternal grace. As they descended, words spilled between them in hushed tones, intimate as confessions in a confessional. "Why me?" she asked, her breath visible in the chill. "You could choose a pure immortal, one untainted by mortal decay. My illness. It's a chain that binds me to death, not eternity." He paused at a fork in the passage, his hand on the rusted iron gate, eyes reflecting the faint glow. "Because you are light in the shadow, Alara. I have watched pure ones twist into monsters, their eternity a license for cruelty. Your humanity, flawed, suffering, reminds me of what I lost, the lover I failed. She chose death over this half-life, teaching me that true power lies in choice, not conquest." His voice cracked, a rare fracture in the king's composure, revealing the solitary man who bore the guilt of wars political and personal, alliances betrayed by ambitious sires, battles where mercy was mistaken for weakness. He desired her not despite her brokenness, but because of it, a redemption that could heal the scar of his past. The gate creaked open, revealing a cavernous chamber where the eastern veil shimmered, a barrier of woven shadows and silver mist, pulsing with wards etched in ancient runes. Beyond it, the forest loomed, twisted trees clawing at the storm-swept sky. Shouts echoed from the tree line, Eldorian accents laced with venom, the clash of blades against immortal flesh. Lucian drew his sword, its blade humming with restrained hunger, while Alara clutched a dagger from her boot, small, mortal, but sharp with intent. They emerged into the fray, rain lashing their faces like accusatory fingers. 3 spies, cloaked in muddied gray, encircled a fallen warden, their leader, a scarred captain with eyes burning fanatic zeal, spotting Alara instantly. "The Dhampir whore!" he snarled, lunging with a silver-tipped blade, symbol of their purge against the tainted. Lucien intercepted, his movements a blur of lethal elegance, disarming the man with a twist that cracked bone. But the captain's free hand flung a vial of holy water, shattering at Alara's feet, the liquid searing her skin like acid where it splashed her ankle. Pain flared, white-hot, but she pressed on, driving her dagger into another's thigh, her Dhampir strength surging through the illness's haze. The ritual of battle unfolded, a chaotic dance of steel and shadow, until Lucian felled the leader. his sword piercing the heart without relish, only necessity. As the spy gasped his last, he whispered, "The council, they knew your blood, sent us to unmake the bride before the union." Revelation crashed over Ilara like the thunder overhead. Betrayal from her own kind. The Eldorian lords who had dispatched her now seeking her end to shatter the peace. Her hand flew to the ring, thorns drawing a bead of blood that mingled with rain. In that moment, amid the metallic scent of spilled life and the velvet black of night, she faced the choice: flee this cursed path, reclaim her mortal solitude, or embrace the transformation. Become the immortal queen, her Dhampir essence awakened to full potency through Lucien's bite, a ritual that would cure her body, but etch eternity's guilt upon her soul. Lucien sheathed his blade, turning to her with blood-streaked concern. "They will come again. The throne, our union. It threatens their thrones of fear." She met his gaze, the storm mirroring the turmoil within. Love resisted, rationalized as survival, yet inevitable as the blood on her skin. To choose eternity was to defy death's claim, to redeem the realms through shared shadows, but at what cost to her humanity? As howls of approaching reinforcements pierced the veil, Ilara whispered, "Then we end this tonight." Stepping into his arms, the rings rose blooming red with her resolve. Yet in the lightning's flash, a traitor's arrow whistled from the dark, aimed at the heart of their fragile pact. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The arrow sliced through the storm's fury, a venomous streak of shadow aimed not at flesh, but at the fragile vow pulsing between them. Lucien moved with the preternatural swiftness of centuries, his body a barrier of unyielding night, as he twisted Ilara into his embrace, the shaft embedding in his shoulder with a dull, wet thud. Pain bloomed across his features, a fleeting grimace that spoke of old wounds reopened, but he did not falter. Blood, dark and viscous, scented of iron and ancient earth, seeped through the tear in his cloak, staining the silver threads like spilled ink on parchment. Ilara's cry caught in her throat, a raw sound swallowed by the thunder, her hands clutching at him as rain mingled with his essence, warm against the chill of her skin. "Stay down," he commanded, voice strained yet steady, the ethical king surfacing even in agony. He shoved her behind a jagged outcrop of rock, the forest's twisted roots clawing at her gown like desperate fingers. The veil's mist swirled thicker now, a protective shroud woven from shadows and forgotten incantations, but it could not mask the encroaching howls, reinforcements from both sides, mortal zealots and immortal loyalists converging in a maelstrom of clashing loyalties. The air reeked of wet pine and gunpowder, undercut by the coppery bite of fresh violence, each breath a labored pull for Ilara, the bomb's reprieve fraying at the edges as adrenaline clawed her lungs. She pressed against the stone, the thorny rose ring digging into her palm as she gripped it like an anchor. Betrayal's revelation lingered, a philosophical poison. The Eldorian Council, those hollow men who had sent her as a sacrificial lamb, now hunted her to preserve their thrones of fear. Her Dhampir blood, once a whispered curse from her grandmother's illicit union, a mortal woman ensnared by a Night Vale wanderer, now marked her as the fulcrum of destinies. Abandoned in plague-ravaged halls where her resilience branded her unnatural. Despoiled by courts that traded her fragility for fleeting truces, Ilara had craved only a quiet dissolution. Yet here, amid the storm's symphony of cracking branches and distant screams, desire twisted into something deeper. Not mere survival, but a yearning to transform suffering into legacy, to choose eternity not as escape, but as defiance. Lucien dispatched the archer with a single, fluid strike, his sword arcing through the rain like a scythe of judgment, before staggering back to her side. His wound knit slowly, immortality's reluctant gift, mending what mortal frailty would shatter. But the silver tip of the arrowhead, etched with purifying runes, burned with holy fire, delaying the heal. He leaned against the rock, breath even despite the torment, his storm-gray eyes locking onto hers with a vulnerability that pierced deeper than any blade. "This is the cost," he murmured, fingers brushing the blood from her cheek where a stray drop had landed. "Every alliance I forge bleeds, my sires. They twist my restraint into weakness, plotting from the shadows of the court. And now your own kind strikes at the heart." Alara's hand trembled as she tore a strip from her sodden hem, pressing it to his shoulder, the fabric darkening instantly. The touch was intimate, unbidden, her warmth against his cooling form a bridge across the abyss. She rationalized it as duty, the queen-in-waiting tending her king. Yet the inevitable pull hummed in her veins, her Dhampir essence awakening like embers stirred by wind. Love, she insisted inwardly, was a delusion born of desperation, a curse that amplified guilt rather than absolved it. But in his gaze, she saw the man beneath the crown, Lucian, once a knight who chose undeath to shield his village from siege, only to watch his lover's pyre etch eternal remorse into his soul. 500 years of ethical solitude, restraining bloodthirsty clans amid political wars, betrayals from ambitious vassals seeking purges, borders aflame with mortal incursions, had left him yearning for redemption through union, not conquest. "Why fight alone?" she whispered, the words escaping despite her resistance. The forest groaned under the assault, blades singing through mist, the veil flickering as wards strained against the onslaught. Death danced at the periphery, its invisible form a chill specter amid the chaos, claiming pawns on both sides while the true players schemed in citadels. "The ring binds us. Let me share this burden, awaken what sleeps in my blood." He searched her face, the rain tracing rivulets down his sharp features, mingling with the sweat of exertion. Philosophical doubt warred in his eyes. To turn her now, in this ritual of blood and vow, would cure her tuberculosis's slow erosion, granting Dhampir potency, full bloom, immortality tempered by her human soul. But it demanded choice, a deliberate surrender to eternity's shadows, where guilt would echo louder, memories unyielding as stone. "It is no light gift. Alara, I was once mortal, choosing this half-life to spare others, only to become the monster they feared. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, yet we carry the damned's weight. Your light, your suffering, could redeem me, but it might eclipse yours." The battle surged closer, shadows clashing in bursts of steel and snarls, the scent of scorched earth rising as an immortal's fire magic ignited a fallen tree. Alara pulled him into a hollow beneath the outcrop, their bodies pressed close in the confined space, the thorny rose ring catching on his cloak like a snare. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his stillness, the texture of his leather-clad chest rough under her palms. "Then let it," she said, voice fierce against the fear coiling in her gut. "The kingdoms fracture because we hide from the merge. My grandmother chose love over fear, whispered tales of a Dhampir's strength to bridge worlds. I am broken, Lucian, but not beyond mending. Bite me. Make me your queen, not in title, but in eternity's forge." Revelation dawned in his expression, a moment of raw choice suspended in the storm's breath. He cupped her face, thumb tracing her jaw with a tenderness born of centuries' longing, then leaned in, fangs grazing her neck, not piercing yet, but promising the ritual's intimacy. The air thickened, charged with sandalwood and rain, her pulse thundering in invitation. As his lips brushed her skin, cool and reverent, Alara felt the world's weight shift, wars political and personal converging on this precipice, her illness's fire yielding to a deeper hunger. But before the bite could seal their transformation, a guttural roar shattered the intimacy, a massive shape bursting through the veil, not spy or warden, but a hulking traitor from Lucian's own court. Lord Vesper, his once trusted sire, eyes blazing with purest fury. "The throne will not dilute with mortal taint," he bellowed, claws extended, the beastly form a testament to unchecked immortality's rage. Lucian shoved Ilara aside, sword raised, but Vesper's strike landed true, raking across his chest and sending him crumpling into the mud. Ilara screamed, scrambling to him as blood pooled, dark and unending, the ring's thorns now slick with it. Vesper advanced, his laugh a thunderous mockery amid the fray. In that heartbeat of horror, Ilara faced the ethical abyss, complete the ritual alone, drain Lucian's blood in desperate salvation, or watch eternity claim the king she could not yet lose. Her choice a dagger to the realm's heart, as distant horns blared the arrival of full armies, sealing their fates in crimson dawn. The mud clung to Ilara's knees like a lover's desperate grasp, cold and unyielding as she cradled Lucian's head, his blood seeping between her fingers in thick, reluctant rivulets. The storm had softened to a mournful drizzle, each drop a silver tear tracing paths through the gore on his pale skin, the scent of it sharp and primal, mingling with the sodden earth and the acrid smoke from the burning tree. Lord Vesper loomed above them, his form a grotesque silhouette against the flickering veil, claws dripping, eyes twin coals of betrayal, his once noble features twisted by the purist's rage that had festered in the Night Vale's shadowed courts. 5 centuries ago, Lucian had sired him in a bid for loyalty during a border skirmish, only for Vesper to twist that gift into ambition, whispering of blood purity amid the political fractures that threatened the throne. Now, he embodied the guilt Lucian carried, the monster born of mercy's misstep, advancing with a snarl that echoed the war's endless hunger. "Ilara," Lucian rasped, his voice a fractured whisper against the distant horns. Eldorian trumpets clashing with immortal war cries, armies converging like tides of inevitable doom. His hand, weak yet insistent, covered hers on the thorny rose ring, the metal warm from her pulse, thorns pricking her skin in tiny accusations. Pain etched his storm-gray eyes, not from the gashes raking his chest, but from the revelation of fractured trust, his ethical rule, forged in restraint and remorse for a lover's pyre, now unraveled by the very blood he had given. Immortality knit his wounds slowly, the silver runes burn warring with his essence, but Vesper's strike had aimed deeper, to sever the alliance before it could redeem the realms. She met his gaze, her own heart a wild flutter against the deathly hush encroaching, the invisible specter coiling around them like mist. Her tuberculosis lurked at the edges of her awareness, the balm's warmth fading under adrenaline's fire, a reminder of her broken vessel, plagues that had stolen her family, leaving her adrift in disillusioned courts where her Dhampir whisper marked her as both savior and curse. Abandoned, despoiled, she had rationalized this path as duty, resisting the bloom of love as a fool's snare. Yet inevitability pressed in, textured by the velvet black of his cloak against her sodden gown, the rain's chill yielding to the heat of shared peril. "I won't let him take you," she vowed, voice steady despite the tremor, her free hand fumbling for the dagger at her belt, its hilt slick with mud and resolve. Vesper laughed, a guttural rumble that vibrated through the ground, his claws flexing as he circled them like a predator savoring the kill. The king weakens for a mortal half-breed. The throne demands purity, not this dilution of our eternal fire. Step aside, Dhampir, or join the dust you crave. His words were venom, laced with the court's betrayals, vassals plotting purges to claim power, wars politicized into holy crusades against the tainted. But Ilara saw the fear beneath, Vesper's immortality a hollow echo, devoid of the redemption Lucian sought through her, through choice over conquest. With a surge born of desperation, she lunged, dagger flashing in the veil's ethereal glow. The blade caught Vesper's arm, drawing a hiss of dark blood, but he swatted her aside like chaff, sending her sprawling into the underbrush. Thorns tore at her skin, real ones from the forest's brambles, mirroring the ring's bite, as pain exploded in her side, ribs protesting the impact. Yet she rose, coughing once, the wet rasp a mortal defiance, her Dhampir blood igniting like embers in dry tinder. Lucian staggered to his feet, sword in hand, but Vesper struck again, pinning him against a gnarled oak with a claw to the throat. The king's blood flowed freer now, pooling at his boots, the scent intoxicating, a siren's call to her awakening hunger. In that suspended agony, revelation crystallized. The ritual they had whispered of was no distant ceremony, but a choice forged here, in mud and betrayal. To save him, to save them, she must drink, draw his essence into her veins, awakening the Dhampir fully without his guiding bite. It was a perversion of the union, her human frailty twisting the immortality he offered, risking a half-transformation that could bind her eternally to his guilt, or shatter her soul in the attempt. Philosophical shadows danced in her mind. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die, but what of one who chose for another? Love, resisted as curse, now demanded surrender. Redemption not in thrones, but in shared shadows, the beauty of suffering transmuted into strength. Ilara crawled forward, the drizzle pattering on her back like hesitant applause, her vision blurring with unshed tears and the pull of his blood. Vesper's focus on Lucian left his flank exposed. She struck low, dagger embedding in his calf, twisting with all her waning strength. He roared, releasing the king to clutch the wound, and in the chaos, she reached Lucian, pulling his torn cloak aside. His chest heaved, wounds gaping like accusations, but his eyes, oh, those eyes, held hers with compassionate fire, urging without words. "Do it," he breathed, as armies' clamor swelled, the veil shuddering under siege. She leaned in, lips to the gash, and drank. The blood was fire and silk, tasting of iron storms and sandalwood regrets, flooding her with visions, his turning in siege smoke, his lover's final dawn, centuries of ethical wars where mercy clashed with necessity. Power surged, her lungs expanding in euphoric clarity, the illness recoiling like shadows from light. Her skin tingled, Dhampir potency blooming, strength, speed, a hunger that whispered of eternity's edge. But it came at cost. Guilt's echo resonated in her, Lucian's remorse now hers, the weight of sired betrayals like chains on her heart. Vesper whirled, sensing the shift, his eyes widening in horror as Ilara rose, transformed yet fragile, her eyes glowing with borrowed night. She moved like wind through willows, wrenching the dagger free and plunging it into his chest, the strike precise, born of newfound grace. He crumpled, gasping curses of diluted thrones, his form dissolving into mist as true death claimed him, immortality's illusion broken by choice's blade. Lucian pulled her close, their blood-slicked hands entwining over the ring, its thorny rose now a blooming emblem of their merged fates. The armies halted at the veil's reinforced pulse, horns faltering in the face of this unforeseen union. But as dawn's first pallor crept through the trees, Ilara felt the transformation's shadow deepen, her humanity frayed, eternity's curse awakening a thirst that rationalized love as addiction. She had saved him, redeemed the moment, yet the choice lingered, full embrace of the throne's wars, or a half-life haunted by what she had become. In the fragile hush before the realm's fragile peace, a scout's cry pierced the mist. The council advances, not with swords, but with a Dhampir hunter, forged to unmake queens. Ilara's blood ran colder than Lucian's touch, the hunter's shadow a personal abyss, promising to sever her transformation, before it could heal the fractured kingdoms. Like if you'd choose eternity for love that sees your soul. The drizzle had woven a fragile truce with the dawn, silver threads piercing the canopy like hesitant promises, illuminating the veil's tattered edges where mist clung to bloodied leaves. Alara stood beside Lucian, her body a battlefield of newfound power and lingering ache, the thorny rose ring pulsing against her finger like a second heartbeat. The taste of his blood lingered on her tongue, rich, forbidden nectar that had flooded her veins with visions of sieges and sunlit pyres, awakening the Dhampir within to a half-life teetering on eternity's brink. Her lungs, once prisons of fevered rasp, now drew air clean and deep. The tuberculosis's shadow recoiled into dormancy. Yet the transformation whispered curses, a thirst uncoiling in her core, sharp as the ring's thorns, rationalized as survival's price, but blooming with the inevitability of addiction. She had chosen this, in mud and betrayal, to save him, to redeem the fractured pact, but now guilt echoed in her soul. Lucian's remorse intertwined with her own, a tapestry of ethical burdens too heavy for one heart alone. Lucian leaned against the oak, his wounds sealing into pale scars under the paling sky, the silver runes burn fading like a vanquished spectre. His cloak hung in tatters, velvet edges frayed by claws and rain, the scent of scorched earth and spilled essence heavy in the air. He regarded her with eyes softened by wonder and sorrow, the king who had sired monsters, now witnessing a queen forged in desperation's fire. "You drank without the right," he murmured, voice a low timbre resonant with ancient cadences, his gloved hand tracing the curve of her jaw, cool against her warmed skin. "It binds us unevenly. Your humanity clings, a light that tempers the dark. But the hunter, he is no mere assassin. Forged by your council's alchemists, a Dhampir like you, twisted to hunt his own kind. They fear what we could become, a throne that unites, not divides." Alara's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the forest yielded to rolling hills scarred by border wars, fields once golden with mortal harvests, now churned to crimson mud by iron legions and immortal shadows. The plagues that had orphaned her had been no natural scourge, but a weapon born of those same councils, laced with elixirs to weaken the realms before conquest. Abandoned in fevered isolation, her resilience a curse that branded her witch among survivors, she had wandered into disillusionment's embrace, desiring only oblivion's quiet. Yet Lucian's presence had unraveled that resolve, his ethical solitude a mirror to her own. The knight turned king, guilt-ridden by a lover's chosen death, restraining bloodthirsty clans amid political betrayals that fractured the night veil. Love had resisted her like a thorned vine, rationalized as alliance's necessity, but now it bloomed inevitable, textured by the velvet hush of his nearness and the distant clamor of halting armies, horns silenced, as if the realms held breath for their verdict. The scout's cry had shattered the fragile peace, his form materializing from the mist like a wraith, bow slung low, face etched with the pallor of one who had glimpsed oblivion. "He comes alone, my lady, through the eastern pass, cloaked in dawn's veil. The hunter bears the council's seal, a blade quenched in Dhampir ash, meant to unmake transformations like yours. Alara's blood, now a potent elixir of mortal fire and immortal night, surged with instinctive dread, her senses sharpening to the rustle of leaves, the faint metallic tang of approaching steel. Death, that eternal companion, materialized in the hunter's shadow, not as scythe-wielder, but as the philosophical thief, stealing choices before they could redeem. They retreated through the underpass, Lucian's arm a steady anchor around her waist, the corridor's phosphorescent glow casting elongated shadows that danced like unspoken regrets. The air was damp, laced with root musk and the echo of dripping water, each step a cadence of introspection amid the urgency. "Why create such a weapon?" she asked, voice hushed, the ring's thorns drawing a faint bead of her blood, now darker, resilient as she clenched her fist. If they sent me to bridge the worlds, why hunt the bridge once built? Lucian's response came soft, weighted by centuries' wisdom. Fear of change. The councils cling to their thrones of division, mortal purges against our kind, immortal vassals like Vesper craving dominion. Your transformation threatens that. A queen who embodies both, redeeming wars through shared eternity. I chose this path long ago, siring sparingly, seeking peace over power. But every immortal was once someone who chose not to die. Ilara, often for love, only to learn its curse, amplifies the shadows. They emerged into the great hall, where candelabros reignited with a flourish, flames leaping like defiant stars against black velvet drapes. Courtiers gathered at a distance, their whispers a susurrus of silk and suspicion, eyes gleaming with the wariness of those marked by betrayal. Lucian guided her to the dais, the throne, a monolithic seat of obsidian and etched silver, looming like judgment incarnate. He knelt before her, not in fealty, but intimacy, drawing a chalice from a hidden alcove, etched with thorny roses, filled with a crimson elixir drawn from his own vein, mingled with ancient herbs to complete the ritual. The hunter nears. Choose now, not half measures but full union. Drink and let my bite seal it. Become the immortal queen, your Dhampir essence our realm's salvation. Or refuse, and let mortality claim what we have forged. Revelation bloomed in her chest, a moment of suspended choice amid the hall's sensory hush. Beeswax smoke curling like incense prayers, the distant patter of residual rain on leaded panes, her pulse a thunderous rhythm against his stillness. Philosophical tides crashed within, eternity's beauty in suffering's transcendence, love as redemption's double-edged blade, wars politicized into personal crucibles. Her brokenness, once a chain of illness and abandonment, now offered strength. To embrace this was to defy the council's fear, to transform guilt into legacy, light piercing the night veil's endless night. Death hovered at the threshold, invisible arbiter, but she met Lucien's gaze, seeing in his storm-gray depths the man who had chosen restraint over ruin, now offering her the same mercy. With trembling resolve, she lifted the chalice, the liquid's warmth spreading through her like dawn's first light, visions cascading anew. Shared memories of battles and betrayals, his lover's final whisper echoing hers unspoken. Then, his fangs pierced gently, a ritual of fire and silk at her throat, binding their essences in euphoric union. Power crested, her body arching, illness banished to memory. Dhampir potency fully awakened into immortality's graceful curse. Strength flooded her limbs, senses expanding to the hall's every texture. Velvet's hush, silver's gleam, the courtier's awed silence. Yet the thirst deepened, a sensual shadow she would learn to temper, love's inevitability now, a compass through eternity's labyrinth. As the transformation settled, a tremor shook the castle, the hunter breaching the outer wards, his blades hum a clarion of impending clash. But Ilara rose, queen in truth, her hand in Lucian's, the thorny rose ring blooming eternal on her finger. Together, they faced the doors, ready to confront the last betrayal, their union a beacon that could heal the realm's wounds or ignite their final war. In that poised instant, as dawn gilded the spires, she knew. Redemption was no fairy tale, but a choice etched in blood, where love's light endured even in shadow's embrace. The hunter's shadow fell across the threshold, blade raised, but in Ilara's eyes burned a queen's unyielding fire, the destinies of kingdoms forever altered by a mortal's defiant heart. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts.